How are you guys doing this morning? Did y'all have a good Thanksgiving? Who in here had like a really good Thanksgiving dinner? What did you guys eat? You guys don't be shy, like shout it out. What was the best dish that you had? Okay, that's the first person that has said turkey. Someone else said sweet potato. All right, what else? Carnitas? Oh, wow. Anybody else? Mac and cheese, I heard. All right, listen, I'm just up here taking notes. I'm trying to figure out whose Thanksgiving I'm going to crash next year. I got to be honest with you guys, all right? Thanksgiving food in my family has always been, well, kind of underwhelming. You know, it just feels like it never really hits the mark. I get it. We're Mexicans trying to do American food. You know, we just don't do under-seasoned food really well, you know? It's just not in our blood, you know? It feels like we're just never getting it right, you know? I don't know. Maybe it's that Thanksgiving food. We're just not wired for it. It also could be that my grandpa insists that we eat Thanksgiving dinner with tortillas. I don't know. This year, my wife and I were determined we're going to have a real traditional Thanksgiving dinner. And so we got in the car. We took the kids to Benihana because nothing says Thanksgiving like hibachi, which coincidentally was also cooked by a Mexican dude. It was like I couldn't escape it. Either way, I'm excited for the holidays. I'm excited for what this season means for all of us. It's a lot of joy and festivities and celebration and events and gifts and all that good stuff. But with all of that also comes, well, a lot of stress, right? And a lot of busyness, a lot of feelings of being overwhelmed. As I've talked to people in the hall, some of y'all are already feeling that. The stress that comes with the holidays is true. Often the thing that people experience the most throughout the holidays is actually anxiety. Right? And especially during the holidays, it can feel like anxiety is coming from every direction, whether that's difficult family dynamics or travel plans or Christmas shopping or whatever that may be. It's like everything is trying to make us fall into anxiety. And so it really makes this wonderful season turn into a wonderfully overwhelming season. And really the data backs that up. You know, there was a study done recently that showed that 26% of people would rather the holidays be entirely canceled for the stress that comes with them. 41% of people report an increase in their levels of depression. 49% of people report increased anxiety. 64% of people report feeling more stressed about their finances during the holidays. And so that means that probably half of this room right now feels as though the holidays are going to impact their mental health, and not in a good way. Let's face it, the holidays are a lot, to say the least, but the truth is that anxiety is not unique to the holidays. No, anxiety really is all around us. I'd venture to say that probably all of us in here, in this room, have at some point or in some way been affected by anxiety, whether that's in your own life or in the life of somebody around you. You know, growing up for me, I didn't grow up with very much anxiety. I never really understood it. It wasn't until I got married and I saw how my wife went through it and the effect that anxiety had on her that it really opened my eyes to see, man, anxiety is all around us. And even now, I see traces of that in my son. At 5 years old, I can see the situations or the moments that start to make him anxious, the times that he begins to shut down, right? Anxiety is all around us. I'd go so far as to say that we are living in the age of anxiety. And so I want to talk about that today because here's what's true, is that when you don't talk about what makes you anxious, you give your anxiety room to grow. When we don't talk about that which makes us anxious, we give anxiety room to grow. And so while the holidays definitely compound the stress, it's not really the root of our anxiety at all. No, the root of our anxiety is actually much deeper than that, but it's also much simpler than that. And I think that it's really woven into the fabric of our humanity. At our core, what we all fear is the unknown. We fear not being in control. We fear not knowing the results. There was actually a paper published in the Journal of Anxiety Disorders that came to the conclusion that the fear of the unknown is what they called the fundamental fear. It's the fear upon which all other fears are built. And here's the gist of that idea, is that every fear that we experience at its core is simply a fear of not knowing how this thing is going to play out. Right? It's the fear that I can't control what's going to happen. And so when we're anxious about seeing our family members, it's not that we're scared of our parents. It's that we don't know how they're going to react to the news or how we're going to be received after not having visited for the last year. Right? When we're anxious about travel, it's not that I'm scared about, going to another state. It's that I don't know how my kids are going to handle a 15-hour car ride. Or I don't know if the plane is going to make it on time, right? I'm not scared of Christmas gifts or presents. I'm scared that I don't know how I'm going to have the time to get it all done. Like, where is all of that going to come from? Am I going to be able to afford it? Are people even going to like what I get them? I mean, think about it. If you knew how the holidays were going to play out, it would probably make it much less stressful, even if the outcome was the same. If you knew beforehand that, hey, your flight's going to be delayed by an hour and a half, this is the time that you're going to get there, we could probably deal with that. If we knew how people would respond to a gift, or that on this specific day is when I'm going to go do my Christmas shopping, like that would be a lot easier to deal with. It's the unknown that brings the anxiety. But the truth is that we can't know everything. We can't know how it's all going to play out. We actually can't really be in control of the results. And if we're being honest, I mean, things rarely add up to the way that we think that they will. And that's highlighted in the holidays for sure, but it's true of our entire lives. If you take one quick look back on your life, you would see that, no, in fact, there is very little that we are in control of. And the Bible actually affirms this truth. It's one of the central themes in the book of Ecclesiastes, which is where we're going to be reading from today. Ecclesiastes was a book that was written, most scholars agree, by Solomon. Solomon has the distinction of not only being the wisest man to have ever lived, but he was also the wealthiest. Some estimates put his net worth in the trillions of dollars. Even conservative estimates say that he made hundreds of billions, right? And he's kind of an interesting character because he's not one of these people that sold his soul in order to gain the world. And he's also not like a Mother Teresa type who rejects a lavish lifestyle. No, he had a relationship with God. He was supremely wise, and he had all of the money that you could ever imagine. And yet, even he gets to the end of his life, and he wonders, why didn't it all work out the way that I thought it was going to? Why did my expectations go unmet? And the word that Solomon uses quite often in this book to build his case is the Hebrew word hevel. And the word hevel means something that is hard to grasp. It's something that I can't really control. It's fleeting, it's futile, it's enigmatic, it's paradoxical at times. And that's the point of this passage that we're going to read. It's this poem that opens up the book of Ecclesiastes in chapter 1. Solomon is basically saying life is hevel. Life is hard to grasp. And so we're going to jump in the word. Chapter 1 of Ecclesiastes, starting with verse 1. As we read this, I really want you to focus in and zero in on every single line that Solomon has to say. Verse number 1, the words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What's he saying? Well, that all of life is fleeting. It's futile, it's hard to grasp. He's going to tell us why. Verse 3, what does a man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun goes down and hastens to the place where it rises. The wind blows to the south and goes around to the north. Around and around goes the wind, and on its circuits the wind returns. All streams run to the sea, but the sea is not full. To the place where the streams flow, there they flow again. All things are full of weariness. A man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. Going down to verse 14, I've seen everything that is done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and a striving after wind. What is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted. I said in my heart, I've acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who were over Jerusalem before me, and my heart has had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. And I applied my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceived that this is also but a striving after wind. And so, clearly, Solomon is having some sort of like existential crisis as we read this, right? And yet the words that he speaks are so true. And it boils down to this. We strive so hard to prove ourselves, to build a legacy, to enjoy life, to have success, to be good people. And yet no matter what we do, we cannot control life. Life is completely and totally and utterly out of our control. And he's making the case that we can't fool ourselves into thinking that life is going to submit itself to our expectations. It just doesn't work that way, is what he's saying. In fact, I'll say it this way. When reality doesn't match our expectations, stress and anxiety are produced. When reality doesn't match, it creates stress and anxiety in us. He's saying all of life is hevel. I can't wrap my arms around it. I can't hold on to it. I can't grasp it. right? And so hevel for us equals what? Well, anxiety, right? We said that earlier. Anxiety comes from the fear of the unknown, the fear of not being in control. If not being in control means anxiety, and you're telling me, right, that nothing is in our control, then simply living means that I'm going to be anxious. However, if you keep reading Ecclesiastes, here's what Solomon says, Ecclesiastes 11, so then, banish anxiety from your heart and cast off the troubles on your body. And I'm like, what? Yeah, in fact, all over the word, we're commanded not to be anxious. Joshua 1:9, have I not commanded you, be strong and courageous? Do not be afraid, do not be discouraged. 1 Peter 5:7, cast all of your anxiety on him. Philippians 4:6, do not be anxious about anything. And it's like, what? Wait. So you're telling me that I'm not going to be in control. And so the temptation for anxiety is going to be all around me, and yet I'm not allowed to fall into it. And God says, exactly. And if you're anything like me, that probably makes you a little bit uncomfortable. Like that doesn't sound fair. That doesn't sound right. Right? It sounds like a recipe for a giant fail. It's like spiritual entrapment or something. It's kind of like this old show. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It was called Bait Car. They'd leave a car in a sketchy part of town, and they'd like roll the windows down, and the keys would be in the ignition, and it'd be unlocked, and they would just wait for somebody to come and steal it. And sure enough, every single time somebody did. And as soon as they did, the cops were right behind them, and they took them to jail. And on the outset, I think that this is kind of what this can feel like, right? The desire to be in control is so deeply ingrained within us that resisting anxiety often feels like a losing battle, right? So much so that often, instead of trying to resist the anxiety at all, instead what we try to do is wrestle control back from God, right? We try to take control back, and that has been humanity's issue since day one. All throughout the Bible, it's almost formulaic. God's in control. God has a plan. Man doesn't really have the patience or the will to see God's plan out, and so they create their own plan, and everything gets way more complicated than it needed to be. I mean, think about it. There's Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. You've got Abraham who couldn't wait for God's promises to come and pass, and so he goes and he has a child with Hagar. You got Jonah trying to judge who deserves God's mercy and who doesn't, and we even do this today. I mean, there's so many ways that we try to take control back from God, whether that's, being in a relationship outside of God's timing, or hoarding earthly treasures for ourselves, sacrificing our rest and our mental health for our career. Why? Well, because the truth is that sometimes we feel more secure in our own hands than we feel in God's hands. And that's exactly what the enemy wants. I'll put it this way. The enemy wants nothing more than for you to believe that you deserve control, that you are the supreme being, that you are the ultimate person in your life. That's what he did with Adam and Eve. He says, listen, you got to eat from the tree. You got to do it, because when you do, you're going to be like God. You deserve to be like God, right? And they believed it. And that belief in themselves as the supreme being led them to disobedience. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that obedience in all of these circumstances is easy. No, obedience to God almost always requires trust. And often on the other side of trust is what? Well, the possibility for anxiety. Listen, the Bible isn't telling us that anxiety is not going to be there. In fact, Paul saying don't be anxious is very much him saying, hey, anxiety is a possibility. I'm just telling you not to do it. Right? With Abraham, there's the anxiety of waiting for decades for his promised child. For Jonah, there's the stress of preaching repentance to a totally morally depraved society. For you, it could be the stress of singleness, or trying to buy a house, or to try to reach a certain milestone in your career. Often, the in-between is shrouded with anxiety. But our job isn't to try to get control back from God so that we can feel better. Our job is to submit and to fight the anxiety, even in the unknown, and even when we're not in control. And the good news is that God has given us the key to do that. This is actually not spiritual entrapment, all right? God spells it out for us plain as day. We just got to finish reading the verse. So, Philippians 4:6, don't be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. The key to fighting anxiety in our lives is gratitude. The key to fighting anxiety in our lives is gratitude. You may have heard this before, but in 2004, there was a study done by Robert Emmons and Michael McCullough that proves the very principle found in this verse. In their study, they found that gratitude kills cortisol, which is our stress hormone. Moreover, they found that anxiety and gratitude actually physiologically cannot live in your brain at the same time. And so what's the point? That gratitude drives out anxiety. And so that's what we're going to talk about for the remainder of our time today, is gratitude as a response to anxiety. What does real gratitude look like? What we're going to see is that real gratitude is a whole self experience. And what I mean by that is that it's something that starts inside of you, but it's something that cannot be contained inside of you. It's something that has to come out of you. And so we're going to title today's message, From the Inside Out. From the Inside Out. You can go ahead and title your notes. So what is gratitude? Well, gratitude is a consistent lifestyle of thankfulness. It's not a feeling that's attached to a particular event. It's not a momentary thing. It is a consistent choice. Understanding this is important because we got to know that we're not just going to fall into or stumble into gratitude. Gratitude is a virtue after all, and so you don't just fall into it. You don't just stumble into it. Actually, gratitude is very much contrary to our natural drift. Our natural drift is to have resentment, to have bitterness, to complain, and so we have to fight our natural drift if we're going to choose gratitude. I heard someone say it this way: it's not that easy to be grateful because life does involve pain and suffering. It's easy to rationally justify resentment. It's to work against the evidence that constitutes the core of gratitude. And so gratitude can be hard. We're not trying to shy away from that, especially in dire circumstances. It's hard to choose gratitude because it's more than just blind positivity, you know? Like, anybody have those friends that no matter what happens, they always just seem positive? Like, everything is good, whether it's traffic or a tragedy or anything in between, everything is always good. And sometimes you just want to tell them, you know what? No, this actually just sucks. Like, this is the worst, you know? Positivity can often feel like being out of touch with reality. It's like you're just choosing to ignore what's around you. But gratitude is not ignoring reality. It's choosing a deeper reality. I'll say it like this: gratitude is choosing the evidence of God over the evidence of my circumstance. And we're going to talk more about that in just a bit. So, what are the dangers of ungratefulness? Well, two things. First is pride, and Paul outlines the effects of pride in Romans chapter 1. Verse 21 says, "For although they knew God, they neither glorified him nor gave thanks to him. But their thinking became futile, and their foolish hearts were darkened." Down in verse 29, it says, "They have become filled with every kind of wickedness, evil, greed, and depravity. They're full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, and malice. They are gossips, slanderers, God-haters, insolent, arrogant, and boastful. They invent ways of doing evil. They disobey their parents. They have no understanding, no fidelity, no love, and no mercy." That's kind of heavy, right? And all of the evil, everything that's described in this passage, comes as a result of failing to honor God. And that's what ungratefulness does. Listen, ungratefulness is a failure to honor God. It's a failure to honor God. And when we don't honor God, what do? Well, we honor ourselves, right? We become proud and arrogant. We elevate ourselves into God's place because we no longer have anybody to thank, right? We give ourselves credit. We give ourselves God's credit, and we do God's job. Wes actually said this last week. He said, "You're never more like the devil than when you're trying to do God's job." All of this evil that we see comes as a result of failing to see God's hand at work, failing to acknowledge him, putting ourselves in his place, failing to be grateful. And so we must be careful not to fall into the pride that comes with ungratefulness. And the second thing that comes from ungratefulness is complaining. Complaining is the attitude of continual dissatisfaction with your lot in life. Probably the clearest example of this that we see in the Bible is the people of Israel. In the book of Exodus, they just complain and complain and complain and complain. They complain because they're hungry. They complain because they're thirsty. They complain because they don't like what they're eating. They complain because they don't like what they're drinking. They complain because of Moses' leadership. No matter what God did, they were dissatisfied, no matter what. And listen, as we've said before, when we see these characters with their faults in the Bible, what we really should be seeing is ourselves. Because, man, we sure can't complain, can't we? I mean, we might not be complaining about manna in the desert, but we complain about a particular season of life, or our spouse, or our kids, or the car that we drive, or the house that's not big enough. We complain about coworkers and friends or not being able to afford that thing that we want. We complain about the weather, it's too hot or too cold. Can you believe we complain about the weather in San Diego? But it's true. And here's what's true about that, is that when you complain, you turn God's blessings into curses. When you complain, you turn God's blessings into curses. That which God had created to provide for you or to bless you, you decided was no longer enough for you. And so it became a curse. Your spouse becomes an annoyance. Your kids become a burden. Your house or the size of your house is now the thing that gets in the way. Listen, we got to understand that complaining has power, right? Complaining makes good things bad and bad things worse. That's what complaining does. It leads us to a life of discontentment where we're no longer satisfied with anything. And a big reason that we experience discontentment in our lives is that often the various things in our lives are out of order. Right? We think that certain things will be able to give us that which only God can give us. And yet the Bible is clear, Matthew 6:33. It says, "Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all of these things will be added unto you." This comes as Jesus is preaching, and he's telling the crowd, listen, you don't have to worry about what you eat or what you drink or what you're going to wear. Understand that God, your Father, already has all of your needs in mind. He already knows everything that you're going to need. What's he saying? Well, that everything that we need is found in God and in God alone. Everything else is extra. God and his kingdom are the main course, right? The rest is just extra. And that's everything, all right? I mean it. Everything apart from God and his kingdom is extra. That means the house and the car and your spouse and your kids, all of it is extra. All of it is added unto us. And can I tell you that many of us feel discontent because we sought first the relationship or the career or the money, and you still feel empty. We've treated God's kingdom as though it's extra, and we're wondering why nothing else will fulfill us. That is because we put our faith in things that were just added unto us. We put our hope and our belief in things that were added unto us rather than in the giver and the creator of those things. And when they don't give us what we need because they can't, we're left worried and anxious and stressed. Listen, discontentment saddens God's heart and leads us to anxiety. That's what God says to the people of Israel after their time in the desert. He says, "Why have they treated me with contempt? Why have they disregarded me?" And so we got to learn to be content. We got to learn to have real gratitude. And so to close, we're going to unpack, very practically speaking, what real gratitude looks like. Gratitude is a series of inputs and outputs. In other words, gratitude has a place that it comes from, but it also leads us somewhere. And so we're going to look at the things that feed our gratitude and the actions that follow, the roots and the fruit of gratitude. And so input number one is evidence. The thing about gratitude is that it's based on reality. We said it earlier, right? It's not just positivity for positivity's sake. No, it's rooted in substance. God is moving all around us. Often we just have to make the decision to see it, right? Cultivating a grateful heart means having your eyes open to the wonders that God is doing among you. And that means in the big things, like it says in 1 Peter chapter 1, it says, "Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. In his great mercy, he has given us new birth into a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, and into an inheritance that can never perish, spoil, or fade." God has given us heaven. God is in the big things, but he's also in our day-to-day. From the moment that we wake up to the moment that we go to sleep, and every moment in between, God is present, right? Each and every day, he's renewing us, and he's restoring us, and growing us, and guiding us, and making a way for us, convicting us, rescuing us, loving us. When we see all that God has done for us, both in the infinite and in the finite, it's impossible to not let that come out of you. And that is output number one. Output one is testimony. So evidence produces testimony. When we witness all that God has done, there's just no way that we can keep that inside of us. You know, we got to tell the world. I mean, think about it. When you see a good sale, or you watch a good show, or a good movie, you eat at a good restaurant, what's your first instinct? To tell somebody, right? And so we got to tell people, come on, you can't tell me that you're more excited about dinner at Caesarina than you are about heaven. I mean, the lasagna is good, but even that's a stretch, you know? We got to tell people. And I'll take it one step further. Sometimes it's telling people, but a lot of times it's showing people. It's showing people the character of God. How? Through service. Service shows the character of Jesus through our actions. Listen, serving is a testimony. Why do I say that? Well, because service isn't normal. In a culture and in a society that prioritizes self and what I want and my desires and my comfort, the ability or the decision to lay down those things for the benefit of somebody else, it just kind of stands out. And so it leaves people asking the question, like, what's going on here? Like, there's got to be a reason that this is happening. Something is different. Like, what's the reason behind all of this? And we all know that there is one, and his name is Jesus. And so I'm so thankful for everybody in here that serves, and in doing so, testifies of Jesus. Right? I think about our missions team serving orphans in Jamaica, or our Abundant Life team. Those women love moms and kids and families so much, and they show the tangible love of Jesus in such an incredible way. I think about our tech team. Most of y'all don't know, there's a group of people sitting up there in the booth right now that help make this entire service run. And in between, you won't ever see them, and they're fixing TVs, and they're doing this and that. Right? I think about our youth team or our kids team, right? People like Russell and Bree and Macy and Emma and Allie, right? All of these people that give of their time every single week to serving our community, right? How about our worship team, or young professionals, or Bloom, or Brotherhood? I mean, I'm so grateful for each and every one of you. God has done wonders among us through your faithfulness. And yet that doesn't tell the entire story. I bet you didn't know that only about 20% of our church family actually serves. A little less than 20% actually. We have seen God do some incredible things throughout the last 5 years, and largely it has been through the faithfulness of this 20% that have determined themselves to let their gratitude come out of them. Just imagine if there were more. Because listen, we don't believe that God is done. There's so many things that we believe he still wants to do, ways that he wants to end spiritual loneliness in the lives of people. But the truth is that it's going to take all of us, a church, a body, a family that is committed to letting gratitude come out in service. I got to talk to our ministry leaders and ask them, I said, what would it take for you to feel like you were really maxing out your ministry? If you were reaching every person that you could reach, if you were doing everything that you could possibly do. And so I'd love to challenge some of you guys to get into the game. As we look into 2024 and what we want ministry to look like, the truth is that it's going to take about 200 brand new people that are ready to jump in and serve. And so I just want to invite you to check out the website, check out the Next Steps page, look at a way that you can serve and just jump in the game. Listen, God wants to make a difference through you. It's not about serving the needs of the church, right? The church is just a vehicle. Some of you guys will serve outside of church. Some of you guys already do serve outside of church, and that is amazing. We need people like you. Again, the church is just the vehicle, right? But you got to know that when you serve coffee, or you help people park, or you provide childcare, right? Or you help run slides up in the booth, like, we're not serving church. We're serving God, and we're serving other people. We're responding to God. Listen, I wholeheartedly believe that a smile, that a cup of coffee, that an hour of childcare can be the thing that sets someone on the path towards life change. I've seen it. The very first name I ever wrote down on my corner card was a guy named Stephen. And Stephen was an atheist. He was convinced that God did not exist, and if there was a God, he sure as heck did not love him. And Stephen was invited to a church event where, in his own words, he found people that he could not understand why, being that they did not know him, did not owe him anything, wanted to spend time with him. I got to see Stephen give his life to the Lord. I got to see him get baptized. I perform his wedding ceremony. And now I get to see him serve other people and bring other people to faith. Listen, when you've got something good, you just can't hold it within you. You got to let it come out of you. He is a walking testimony. Service shows what God has done, and it shows people who God is. And that's the second input of real gratitude, and I'm going to close with this. Input number 2 is character. Real gratitude is built on the truth of God's character, on the truth of who he is, right? Not our feelings, not what the circumstances around me say, not what the trials say, not what the opposition says, but what the word says, the truth. Who is God, right? He is our King. He is our Lord, the rock of our salvation, our deliverer, our beginning and our end, our creator, our healer, our sanctifier. Our God is able. Gratitude means living in light of that. And when you do, what comes out of you? It's worship. Output number 2 is worship, because real worship is about who God is and not what I feel. That means that I can worship in the fire, I can worship in the trial, I can worship in the fight for my life. Why? Because my God remains. And so I don't tell my God how big the circumstances are. I tell the circumstances how big my God is. Listen, gratitude means seeing things in light of God and not in light of the circumstance. And that gives me hope. Listen, the reason that we're grateful is because we have a hope that's real. We said that earlier. It's not just blind positivity. No, our faith has a substance, it's evidence. I'm not just lying to myself long enough so that I believe it, right? The evidence is there. Look back at the things that God has done and worship. Listen, worship has the power to transform knowledge into belief. You know, knowledge may be something that we have in our heads, but belief is what we hold in our hearts. And worship has the power to create that, because the trials are hard. The opposition is intimidating, and so I need to have that knowledge not just in my head, but it needs to be a well deep within my heart that I can pull from, that I can lean on, and that I can live from. Worship is the bridge between your head and your heart. What's right in between your head and your heart? It's your mouth. And so you've got to say it. You've got to let it come out of you. Worship isn't about reminding God of who he is. It's about reminding me. It's about reminding us of who God is. It's in worship that we experience the transformative power of gratitude. Worship is what sees your enemies fall. Psalm 68:1, as God arises, his enemies are scattered. When we worship God, stress and anxiety and worry must flee. And so we're going to end today with a time of worship. I want to invite you guys to stand. We're going to lift up God together. We're going to sing that old song called From the Inside Out. And as we sing it, I just want you to take a moment to reflect on the truth of who God is. Let that be what creates gratitude inside of you. But don't stop there. Let it come out of you. Let's worship together.